So today I want to talk to you about overcoming limitations. But the first thing I want us to do together is I'd like for us to do a puzzle. Now, how many of you have seen this before? Raise your hand. Okay, good. This is good. Okay. Now, it has many names. I've called it simply the box problem. But there are many different versions of this quiz or puzzle. But the goal is very simple. It's simply to connect all of the dots. Very simple. However, there are some rules. There are 3, in fact. Rule number 1, you can only use 4 lines. All right? Rule number 2, the lines must be straight. So no squiggly lines, only straight lines. And number 3, the lines must be continuous. All right? So if you were to be drawing this, it would be pin o hanasanaide. You'd have to connect them. All right? So I'm going to put this up, and what I'd like you to do now is to, in your mind, see if you can solve this puzzle, and I'll go through it one more time. The goal is to connect all of the dots. And there are 3 rules. Rule number 1, only 4 lines. Rule number 2, the lines must be straight. And rule number 3, the lines must be continuous. Now, for me, the first time I looked at this puzzle, I got kind of irritated. I got a little irritated and angry because I could not figure it out. And I don't like puzzles that I can't figure out. So I thought about it, I worked at it, and I did some things like this. I tried like this. Oh, well, close, but still one left. I tried like this. Oh, I'm going backwards. I've got 2 dots now. So I worked at it and worked at it. So I'm curious, the time I've given you, has anyone figured it out? Raise your hand if you figured it out. Okay, we got 1. I couldn't. I had to go look up the answer. And I'm going to show you the answer. I want to see if you ran into the same problem that I ran into. You see what happened? In my mind, I never thought to draw a line beyond the box, beyond the dots. I didn't think about it. So while there were 3 rules I gave you, in my mind, I actually had 4 rules. I had the 3 rules that I'd given you, but in my mind, my 4th rule was no lines beyond the box. So for me, the box really looked more like this. Now, in this problem, it demonstrates there are 2 kinds of limitations we're dealing with. And in our life, most of our limitations can be put into 2 different categories, and I'm going to go through those. The first type of limitations is outside limitations. These are limitations that I do not have control over. Okay? These would be the 3 rules I gave you. You have no control over those rules. They are put upon you. Those are outside limitations. The second kind of limitations are inside. That would be the 4th rule that you made for yourself. That's an inside limitation. I did that to myself. So at first you see these and you think, okay, I think I understand this, but I want to work through it a little bit. I'm going to give you a few examples, and we're going to see really kind of flesh out this outside and inside, the differences. So, let's say I'm driving my car. Now, I don't drive a sports car. I have a 3-year-old now. I drive a van. So I'm driving my van, and I see a sign. And the sign says 50 kilometers per hour. It's a speed limit. Now, what kind of limitation is that? Inside or outside? It's outside. I cannot control that. The Japanese government says you can only go 50 kilometers per hour. Fairly simple. How about this one? Let's say I wanted to become an NBA basketball player. Now, many of you are thinking right now, Micah, you're a little bit short. And you'd be right. I'm also not very fast, and I can't jump very high, which are pretty important if you want to be a basketball player. Now, I could train my body, and I could work harder to make myself a little faster, and maybe jump a little higher, but the truth is, I just do not have the the physical abilities needed to be a basketball player. And I have no control over that. So that would be another example of outside limitations. Let's look at one more. These are all me, by the way, as you can tell. Now, let's look at the last one. Let's say being able to swim. Being able to swim. Now, in some cases, this might be an outside limitation. Let's say you live in the desert and there is no water or people that know how to swim to teach you. You have no control over that. That would be an outside limitation. Or if you are in a wheelchair, you cannot help that. That would restrict you from being able to swim. But let's say for most of us in this room, if we cannot swim, is that because of something outside or inside? What is limiting us? Maybe it's fear. Maybe you're afraid of the water. Maybe it's a situation where you really don't care to learn to swim. But for most of us here, it is not an outside limitation that would keep us from being able to swim. It would come from the inside. And these are the limitations, the inside limitations, that I want to focus on right now. And there are many different things that contribute that can cause these inside limitations. But right now, I want to look at 3 big limit makers in our lives. Now again, there are more, but these are 3 I want to highlight today. Number 1 is assumptions. Now, assumptions, an example of an assumption would be, earlier when I did the box problem, I gave you 3 rules. And what happened is anytime you've been given a puzzle with dots and lines in the past, you always connected dot to dot. You never went beyond to where there was no dot. So you assumed that in this puzzle, just like me, that you would also be doing the same thing. But because of that assumption, you're actually not going to be able to finish the problem. I'll give you another example. I love sushi. I do. I think sushi is delicious. But let's say that from the time I was born in America till I came to Japan, everyone I talked to said, sushi is gross. Or, Micah, it's raw fish. It's disgusting. And every time I heard sushi, someone said, yeah, it's gross, it's gross. When I came to Japan and someone asked me, Micah, do you like sushi? I might answer, no, because it's gross, even though I have never in my life eaten sushi. You see, I made an assumption based on what others had told me. And assumptions can come from all over, from our families, from our cultures, but they're very powerful. Number 2, contentment and laziness. I feel like this is a little bit of an American limitation, at least for me. I would love to look like Brad Pitt. Now, I can't do anything about this, but in terms of my body, I could, right? I could go to the gym, I could eat better, but you know what? That's hard. And I'm a little bit lazy, and maybe in the morning when I could go to the gym, I decide to sleep just a little bit longer. Or maybe I'm just fine with my body. I'm just okay. I'm content. Now, contentment is fine, but it can limit us, and we have to remember that. And number 3 is fear. Fear is big in America. Fear, I know, is big here as well. And I think when we hear fear, we think of things like the fear of animals or heights or flying, which those are real fears. But the fears I kind of want us to think about, these inside fears, are fears like the fear of failure, the fear of the unknown, the fear of what others will think of me, the fear of standing out. These are very, very powerful things because they will prevent us from doing things. We may have a dream, but because we're afraid, we will not pursue and move forward in that dream. Now, here's the thing. My speech today is called Overcoming Limitations. But here's the thing. In my history and past, and from what I understand, there is not a simple way to overcome everything. Just in a few minutes, I give it to you, and everyone goes out and overcomes everything. But what we need to do is we need to realize if what is really preventing me is outside of my control or if it's inside of my control. And to do that, I want to give you some tools to analyze, to see if in your situation, if in your dream, if it is an outside limitation or an inside limitation that is really preventing you from reaching it. So think of what are the tools, A-R-E, what are the tools? Number one is ask why. Why is a very, very powerful question. Why is a revealing question. With the power of why, my 3-year-old son can stop me in my tracks. And I'll give you an example. So my lovely wife, Amy, would cook us a dinner, cook us some chicken for dinner. So I take the chicken and I go and I set it in front of my 3-year-old Ariston, and I say, Ariston, you need to eat your chicken. And Ariston looks at me and says, why? And I say, well, because chicken is good for you. And he says, why? And I go, well, because chicken is full of protein, and protein helps you grow big and strong. And he goes, why? And I go, because protein is an important biological amino acid. I don't know, Ariston. I'm your dad. Eat your chicken. But do you see what happened with just that one question? 3-year-old Ariston was digging deeper and deeper. And this is a difficult question to ask ourselves because it allows us to dig deeper. As we look at our problems, as we look at our limitations, and we say, why? Why can't I do that? And it takes bravery because sometimes we reach a point where we don't know why. But that's okay. It lets us dig deeper and lets us see what is really limiting us. Number 2 is research. We live in the age of the internet where we can find out almost anything. So we have no excuse to not really be well-read about something we want to do. Number 3 is experience. This one's big. Find someone, if you have a dream, if you have something you want to do, find someone who has done it or is doing it and talk to them and ask them what they did to get where they are, what problems they had to overcome. And what you'll see is that oftentimes those individuals had to overcome several different kinds of limitations to get where they are. So again, what are the tools? A, ask why. R, research. And E, experience. So for me, 5 years ago, I was working for a Swiss bank in Raleigh. And it was a good job. It was very stressful, but it was a good job. But I really, really wanted to do a job, to do something that was making a difference in the world. I wanted to go and do something meaningful for the world. But at that time, when I thought about all of the things in my life, all I could think about was, well, I have a newborn baby. My wife quit her job to stay home with the baby, so I'm the only one working. Things like I have bills. Things like I have school debts to pay. And these are very real problems. And so initially I thought, I just need to work here because it's safe and I understand it. But as I started thinking, as I really started asking myself, why can't I do this? When I really started doing my research, when I started talking to people who had left the business world to pursue their dreams, what I realized was what was really preventing me from doing something was my fear. I was afraid. I didn't know what the future would look like. The bank, I understood a little better. But this whole dream, I don't know. So me and my wife, we talked a lot about it. As Christians, we prayed a lot about it. And we researched and we asked and we continued to work, and we came to a point where we said, okay, we want to pursue this. Now, it wasn't easy. I ended up, during the process, me, my wife, and my son, we had our own house, and we moved back in with my parents, which does not look good on Facebook. You know, put a picture up on Facebook, hey guys, I'm back with my parents. Not really something you want to brag about. So it was difficult, but here we are 5 years later in Tokyo doing exactly what we sought out to do. So what I want you to do is I want to go back to the box problem. If you remember, I gave you 3 rules to follow when solving this. Now, those rules made the problem difficult, but it did not make it impossible. It was possible to solve. Difficult, but possible. What prevented us from solving the problem was my box. And this is what happens to us, guys, in our lives. We have very real limitations. We have things we can't control that do prevent us from reaching our goals. However, usually, what really prevents us from reaching our dreams, from reaching our goals, is that inside limitation. It's that box. And so my challenge to you today is to not let those inside limitations prevent you from pursuing your dreams and your goals. Thank you.